Have you ever returned home after
Quiet.
years away,
Listen.
only to find someone
What is
waiting in
going on in
silence,
there?
hiding something you were never meant to see? When the millionaire stepped into his old house that rainy night, the maid rushed to him and whispered, "Please, stay quiet, sir." What secret could make even a loyal heart tremble like that? Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The rain drummed on the windshield as Graham Leland sat in his car, staring at the grand house that no longer felt like home. It had been raining for hours, the kind of steady, unrelenting rain that blurred the outlines of things, softening edges, making everything seem quieter than it was. Through the silver threads of water, the iron gates of Leland Manor stood closed and dark. Beyond them, the house waited 3 stories of cold stone and memories he wasn't sure he wanted to meet again. He turned off the engine, but didn't move. For a long moment, there was only the soft ticking of the dashboard clock and the whisper of rain against the glass. 3 months in Europe had felt like an escape, a blur of hotel rooms, meetings, and dinners where everyone smiled at his success, but no one saw his loneliness. He used to believe the world respected him, that wealth was a shield against emptiness. Tonight, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. When he finally stepped out, the cold hit him like a wall. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he crossed the driveway, raindrops sliding down the brim of his coat. Each step echoed faintly in the dark. The mansion loomed ahead. Its windows shuttered except for one faint glow near the kitchen, just enough to make him wonder who was still awake. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the brass key. It slid easily into the lock. That was when he noticed the bolt wasn't drawn. He frowned. In this house, the locks were always set. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges releasing a groan that seemed too loud for the hour. The familiar scent of waxed wood and faint lavender polish greeted him, mixed with something older silence and time. The paintings on the walls, the ornate grandfather clock, the Persian rug from Istanbul, all sat in perfect order. And yet, something was wrong. It wasn't peace, he felt, but stillness, the kind that listens. Graham set his briefcase on the floor and looked at himself in the mirror by the hall. The reflection startled him. The man who stared back looked older than he remembered. The gray in his hair sharper, the lines around his eyes deeper. He managed a dry laugh. "You built everything, and you lost yourself along the way," he muttered. The sound of his voice felt foreign here, like it didn't belong anymore. Then he heard it, a faint rustle from down the corridor. A whisper, light as a breath. He froze, heart thudding. Somewhere beyond the archway, a voice spoke, barely audible through the rain. "Please, don't make a sound, sir." The words were tremulous, urgent, and familiar. He turned sharply toward the sound. From the shadows emerged a woman with damp hair clinging to her temples and eyes wide with alarm. Marta Solis, his housekeeper for more than a decade, stood trembling in her blue uniform, one hand pressed to her chest. "Marta?" Graham whispered. "What is it? Why are you—" She lifted her hand slightly, palm outward, pleading for silence. "Please, Mr. Leland," she said in a broken voice. "Don't raise your voice. You shouldn't have come back so soon." Rain battered the windows. His pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Speak plainly." Marta glanced over her shoulder toward the hallway leading to the living room, as though afraid the walls might overhear. Her voice fell to a whisper again. "There's someone in the house." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Only the grandfather clock continued its slow, patient rhythm, marking the seconds like footsteps towards something inevitable. Graham's brows tightened. "Someone in my house?" he said under his breath, the words carrying more disbelief than anger. Marta nodded faintly, her lips trembling. The light from the kitchen flickered, casting her shadow against the wall like a confession. She didn't want to speak. "Who is it, Marta?" he asked. His voice dropped to a whisper, but there was steel underneath. "Who's in my home?" "I can't say, sir," she murmured. "Not yet. Please, just don't make any noise." The way she said it, soft, almost maternal, sent a strange chill through him. Graham looked toward the long corridor that led to the parlor. The air was heavy, almost alive, thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth filtering through the open window. The silence felt wrong too still, like a breath held too long. He moved slowly, his polished shoes tapping softly against the marble. Each sound he made seemed to echo back twice as loud. Marta followed at a distance, her hands clutching her apron. Her breathing was fast, uneven. "You shouldn't have come home tonight," she whispered, voice breaking. "Not like this." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The house that had once been his fortress now felt foreign. Every picture frame, every step on the Persian rug seemed to belong to another man. The closer he got to the parlor, the more his chest tightened. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, heavier, the kind of dread that grows in the space between knowing and denial. From beyond the doorway came the faintest murmur, a laugh light, careless and horribly familiar. Then a man's low voice, muffled by distance. Graham's breath caught. He turned to Marta, but she couldn't meet his eyes. Her gaze fell to the floor, tears gathering beneath her lashes. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, barely above a whisper. His throat felt dry. "Find out what?" Her answer came as a tremor. "Please, sir, not here, not like this." But he was already moving. Step by slow step, he followed the sound of laughter down the hall. The grand portraits on the wall seemed to watch him past the painted eyes of ancestors looking down in silent judgment. A draft stirred the curtains. The rain outside grew softer, but inside, his heartbeat filled the silence. At the end of the hall, a door stood half closed. Behind it, the soft clink of a glass, a rustle of fabric, and the unmistakable sound of a woman's laugh, the same laugh he had once loved. The same laugh that had welcomed him home years ago. Graham's hand hovered over the doorknob. His fingers trembled, slick with rain. He felt Marta's presence behind him, her breath shaky, her voice breaking one last time. "Forgive me, sir," she said. "I tried to protect you." The words sank into him like the chill from the storm. He looked at her, then back at the door. The silence that followed was unbearable, so complete that he could hear the rain sliding down the window panes, the ticking clock, the faint crackle of the lamp in the hall. Time seemed to hold its breath. He turned the knob. The hinges groaned, and light spilled across his face, warm, golden, and cruel. Inside the parlor, the scene unfolded like a photograph coming to life. His wife, Clara, standing by the fire in her silk robe, a young man beside her, both frozen mid-movement, wineglasses still in hand. For a moment, no one spoke. The world held still. Then, without a word, Graham's grip loosened. The glass he had been holding slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sound of breaking crystal echoed through the house, sharp as a gunshot, marking the precise instant his world collapsed. Outside, the rain kept falling, indifferent. A woman's gasp, a man's hurried step, the weight of 10 silent years pressed upon the air. And in that stillness, with the storm whispering against the windows, Graham Leland understood that the silence he had come home to was not peace. It was the sound of something ending. The silence that followed was unbearable. The broken glass glittered on the marble floor like scattered ice under the dim light. Clara stood by the fire, her silk robe slipping from one shoulder, her hand trembling around a half-empty glass of red wine. Beside her, the young gardener, Noah Riley, looked pale, frozen mid-breath, unsure whether to run or speak. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the fire crackling softly, mocking the storm that still beat against the windows. Graham stood just inside the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his face unreadable, his eyes, tired and hollow, swept over the scene like a man searching for something that might still be saved, but finding nothing. "Graham!" Clara's voice broke the stillness, faint and brittle. "This isn't what it looks like." He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. "Isn't it?" he asked quietly. The words came out calm, but carried the weight of years. Noah took a hesitant step back. "Sir, Graham raised a hand slightly. "Don't." His tone was steady, but the air seemed to tighten around them. The clock on the mantel struck 9, each chime falling like a nail sealing a coffin. Marta appeared at the doorway, her face pale with dread. "Please," she whispered. "Mr. Leland, she didn't mean." But Graham didn't look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on Clara, who now stood rigid, her tears caught in the soft light of the lamp. "How long?" he asked finally. "Have you been this unhappy?" She swallowed hard, setting the glass down. "You were gone for months, Graham. You've been gone for years, even when you were here. You stopped seeing me long before tonight." Her words hit harder than any accusation. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had signed contracts, built companies, written checks, but never once reached across the table for her anymore. The fire's reflection danced in his eyes, warm and cruel all at once. "I was building us a life," he murmured. Clara's voice cracked. "You built a kingdom, not a home." Behind them, Noah lowered his head, shame clouding his young face. "I'll leave," he whispered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I shouldn't have—" "Go," Graham said softly, not looking at him. "Before I remember your name." Noah hesitated, then hurried out through the side door, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Marta stepped aside as he passed, wringing her hands. Clara tried to speak again, but Graham's calm stopped her cold. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't even angry. What filled the room wasn't rage, it was emptiness, vast and heavy, like the pause between thunder and lightning. He walked toward the window, watching the rain trace crooked lines across the glass. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to imagine what it would be like to come home after a long trip. Your voice, the smell of dinner, the feeling that someone was waiting. Funny thing is, I did come home, just to an empty room." Clara covered her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "No," he said, turning toward her. "It never is." The fire crackled louder. Throwing their shadows long across the wall, two figures caught between light and darkness, too far apart to touch, too close to forget. The firelight flickered, throwing waves of gold and shadow across the room. Clara turned away, unable to bear the look in his eyes. She had expected shouting, anger, maybe even cruel words, but not this silence. This stillness was worse than fury. It was resignation, like a door closing gently instead of slamming. "I don't hate you," Graham said after a long moment. His voice was low, almost tender. "I think I stopped being angry a long time ago. Maybe I just forgot what it felt like to care." Clara wiped her cheeks, trembling. "Don't say that." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not blame, Clara. It's truth. Somewhere along the way, we started living next to each other instead of with each other." Her lips quivered. "I waited for you, Graham. Every night I waited. But you were always at another dinner, another city, another meeting. The only thing that ever came home was your suitcase." He took in the words like a slow wound. "And you filled the silence," he said quietly. "I suppose we all find ways to survive loneliness." The grandfather clock chimed again, its tone dull and heavy. Outside, the rain softened into a steady whisper. Marta, still standing near the doorway, clutched her apron, her face streaked with quiet tears. "Please, sir," she said softly, "don't make a scene. She's sorry. We all are." Graham turned to her, his voice gentler now. "There's no need to hide what's already broken, Marta." He stepped forward, stooping to pick up the shattered glass at his feet. One by one, the fragments caught the light like tiny mirrors, each one reflecting a moment that couldn't be put back together. When he straightened, his eyes met Clara's one last time. "Do you remember," he said slowly, "the first time we came to this house? You said it was too big. You said it would swallow us whole." He paused. "I guess you were right." Clara's sob broke the quiet. "Please, don't go like this." But he was already walking toward the hallway. Marta moved as if to stop him, then froze when she saw his face. There was no rage in it, no bitterness, only exhaustion. At the front door, Graham paused. The rain beyond the glass shimmered under the porch light, turning the air into a curtain of silver. For a moment, he simply watched it fall. Behind him, the house stood silent, except for Clara's soft weeping and the steady tick of the clock. He reached for his coat and said, almost to himself, "You've already taken what's left of me." Then he opened the door. The cool air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet leaves and cedar. He stepped out without looking back. The door closed with a soft click, and the house seemed to exhale a deep, aching sound that faded into the storm. From the upstairs window, Marta watched as he walked across the drive, his figure blurring beneath the rain. For a long while, she stood there, her hand pressed against the cold glass, whispering words he could no longer hear. In the distance, thunder rolled softly over the Vermont hills, and the lights inside Leland Manor flickered, as if the house itself was mourning the man who no longer belonged to it. The rain had eased by dawn, leaving the world wrapped in silver mist. Graham drove without knowing where he was going, the wipers beating slow, tired rhythms against the windshield. The road wound through sleepy hills and golden trees, their leaves heavy with dew. The town of Woodstock was just waking up. Storefront lights flickered on. A diner sign buzzed faintly, and smoke curled from chimneys like morning prayers. He slowed the car as he crossed the old covered bridge at the edge of town. The wooden beams creaked softly beneath the tires, the river below swollen from the storm. On the other side, something caught his eye, a small figure by the roadside, huddled under a sagging umbrella. He pulled over. Through the blur of drizzle, he saw a girl no more than 9 standing beside a folding table covered with a checkered cloth. A hand-painted sign read, "Apple pies, $2 for the Harvest Festival." The pies were wrapped neatly, though the rain had dampened the edges of the boxes. Graham rolled down his window. "You're out early," he said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. The girl looked up. She had light brown hair pulled into a messy braid and eyes the soft blue of morning sky. "Gotta sell them before school," she said cheerfully, though her nose was red from the cold. "Grandma says if I sell all 20, we can pay for the raffle table at the festival." He stepped out of the car, pulling his coat tighter. "You're doing this all alone?" She nodded. "Grandma's at home. She baked. I'm just the seller." Graham smiled faintly despite himself. "And your parents?" The girl hesitated, then said softly, "Mom's in heaven. Grandma says she's baking for the angels now." For a moment he didn't speak. The simplicity of her words disarmed him more than any confession ever could. The river murmured below, and somewhere far off, a church bell chimed 8. He crouched to meet her eyes. "What was your mother's name?" "Laura," she said, then added proudly, "Laura Carter. She used to work for a big house up the hill. Said the man there was very kind once. Mr. Leland, I think." The words hit him like a quiet thunder. He stared at her, blinking, his breath caught between disbelief and guilt. "Mr. Leland," he repeated, the name tasting foreign on his tongue. "Did she ever say what happened to her job?" The girl tilted her head, thinking, just that she stopped working one day. Grandma said the man didn't believe her about something, but Mom said she forgave him. She said holding anger was heavier than carrying pies. A strange tightness grew in his chest. He looked at her small, earnest face, the faint smudge of flour on her sleeve, the quiet dignity in her voice. It had been years since that day, since the missing watch, since he'd fired the young maid who couldn't defend herself. He had forgotten her name, her face, her tears, but the little girl standing before him was her echo, her memory come to life. He bought 2 pies, though he didn't care for sweets. She smiled wide, counting the bills with careful fingers. "Thank you, Mr. M. Keep the change," he said gently. Her eyes widened. "That's too much." "Then consider it a donation," he replied. "For your mother." She beamed, tucking the money into a tin box. Then, from her pocket, she pulled out something wrapped in plastic, a small photograph, old and faded. "Mom said this was her favorite picture. You can have it if you want. You look like someone who misses people too." He took the photo carefully. The image was grainy but unmistakable. A young woman in a blue uniform smiling in front of the grand doors of Leland Manor. And on the back, in faint ink, a name. Laura Carter, Housekeeping. He stared at the photograph as if the paper itself could breathe. The smile on Laura's face was the kind that once filled hallways, with light, simple, open, without bitterness. It was the kind of smile he hadn't seen in years. The drizzle turned heavier again, rippling over the bridge's wooden planks. Somewhere behind him, a car passed, sending up a splash of muddy water. But Graham didn't notice. He turned the photo over in his hands, reading the name twice, as if repetition might erase what he remembered. Laura Carter. Yes, he knew that name once. She had worked for him, a young woman from the outskirts of town, quiet, efficient, always humming when she dusted the piano. And one afternoon she had been accused of stealing his silver watch. He remembered the fury, the embarrassment in front of his guests, the way she'd tried to explain with tears that the watch had been misplaced, not stolen. But he hadn't listened. He'd fired her on the spot. 2 days later, the watch turned up in his office drawer. He told himself it was too late to apologize, that such things didn't matter. But they had. They always did. A gust of wind lifted the girl's hair. She laughed softly, holding the umbrella tighter. "It's okay, mister. You don't have to be sad, she said kindly. Mom said, sometimes good people make bad choices. She said, even when people forget you, God remembers. Her words struck him deeper than he expected. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. The guilt that had slept for years began to stir. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat ached instead. Then, through the thinning rain, a familiar figure appeared on the far side of the bridge, Marta Solis, carrying an umbrella, her shoes splashing through puddles. Her face was pale with surprise when she saw them together. "Mr. Leland," she called, breathless. "I've been looking for you." Sophie waved cheerfully. "Hi, Miss Marta." Marta blinked, startled. "Sophie? What are you doing here, sweetheart?" "Selling pies for Grandma?" the girl chirped. "This nice man bought two? And—" Marta's eyes darted from Sophie to Graham, then to the photograph in his hand. The color drained from her face. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered. "You know, don't you?" Graham held up the photo. "She was your friend." Marta's lips trembled. "She was my cousin," she said quietly. "And you fired her." The words were not cruel, just true. They hung between them like the mist over the river. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I didn't remember." You didn't want to remember," Marta said softly, her voice breaking. "She never blamed you, sir. Even when she got sick, she said you were a good man once. She prayed for you every Sunday." Graham felt the weight of rain and memory pressing on his shoulders. His eyes burned, not from the cold, but from something heavier. He turned to Sophie, who looked between them in confusion. "She used to tell me about you," the girl said gently. "Said one day you'd find your way back home. And—" The bridge creaked under their feet as the wind shifted. Graham knelt down so he was eye level with her. "Sophie," he said softly, "your mother was right about more things than I deserve." She smiled, small and pure. "Then you should come to the Harvest Festival tomorrow. Everyone's welcome there." He nodded slowly, unsure if his voice would hold. "Maybe I will." Marta's umbrella tilted slightly, the rain catching in the fabric, dripping down her sleeve. "Come on," she said quietly to Sophie. "Let's get you home before you catch a cold." The girl waved goodbye, the photograph's empty corner fluttering in her hand as she walked away beside Marta. Graham stayed behind, the mist curling around him like a confession. The river murmured softly below, carrying the sound of the rain downstream, gentle, steady, forgiving. For a long moment, he just stood there, the photograph pressed to his chest. The air smelled of wet wood and apples. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he whispered words that felt like a prayer. "I'm sorry." The apology dissolved into the rain, small but real. And for the first time since he'd left home, the silence around him didn't feel empty, it felt like something listening. The rain had stopped, but the town was still wrapped in a quiet mist. Graham stood by the bridge, long after Sophie and Marta disappeared from sight. The river beneath him whispered softly, carrying bits of leaves and reflections of pale clouds. The world smelled of wet wood and distant smoke from the breakfast diners down the hill. He looked again at the photograph in his hand, Laura Carter's smile, framed by the doorway of the house he once called his pride. Her uniform was neat, her eyes gentle, unaware that the moment captured would someday become the proof of his shame. He traced the faded ink of her name, as if the act itself could make amends for the years of silence that followed. When footsteps echoed behind him, he didn't turn right away. Marta came slowly, holding the same umbrella as before. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I told Sophie I'd bring you home, sir," she said softly. "She thinks you're lost." Graham let out a tired breath. "She's right about that." Marta hesitated before stepping closer. "You remember Laura now, don't you?" He nodded. "Every word I said to her, every look." Marta swallowed, her fingers tightening around the umbrella handle. "She never spoke badly of you, not once. Even when she got sick, she'd tell me, 'Mr. Leland's just forgotten how to see people. He'll remember someday.'" Her words hung in the air like a benediction and a curse, all at once. Graham looked toward the river. "I don't deserve that kind of kindness." Marta sighed. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. She forgave you because that's who she was." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the mist weaving around them. Then Graham turned to her, his voice low, trembling slightly. "I fired her because of a missing watch. I accused her without proof, humiliated her in front of everyone. I found the watch 2 days later in my own desk drawer. I was too proud to admit I was wrong. Marta's gaze softened. She knew, sir. I told her. I thought she'd hate you for it, but she just smiled. Said pride was a heavy thing to carry, and she hoped someday you'd lay it down. A tremor passed through him. He stared at the photograph again, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. I've carried it long enough, he said quietly. Marta looked toward the road where the diner's neon sign flickered faintly through the fog. It's not too late, you know, she said. Laura's gone, but her daughter isn't. Sophie still believes the man her mother talked about exists. Graham gave a weary smile. Maybe she's mistaken. Marta shook her head. Or maybe you just haven't met him yet. He looked at her, surprised by the tenderness in her tone. For the first time in years, he felt seen not as the businessman, not as the husband who failed, but as a man trying to remember what it meant to be decent. The mist thickened, blurring the outlines of the town beyond. He turned back toward the river, the old bridge groaning beneath his shoes. She forgave me, he whispered, and I never asked for it. Then start now, Marta said simply. He glanced up at her. She was watching him the way one watches a wounded bird quietly, without pity, only patience. Graham's voice broke. Marta, do you ever think it's possible to rebuild what you destroyed? She smiled faintly. Only if you stop building it for yourself. The mist grew thicker, wrapping the bridge in a soft white veil. Graham felt its chill seep into his skin, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the water below as if it could answer all the questions he'd avoided for years. The current flowed slow and heavy, carrying fallen leaves and fragments of broken branches. It looked almost peaceful until you noticed how strong it really was beneath the surface. He took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper. I thought success would keep me safe from regret. That if I worked hard enough, if I built high enough walls, the past couldn't reach me. Marta said nothing. She simply listened, her umbrella tilted, a faint drizzle tapping against the fabric. But it does reach you, he went on, not with anger, but with memories, with the faces of people you wronged who somehow still wish you well. He took a step closer to the edge and knelt down, resting his hand on the damp wood. His reflection wavered in the water, older, smaller, humbled. The bridge creaked beneath his weight, and the sound reminded him of how fragile everything truly was. I'm sorry, Laura, he said softly, the words barely carrying over the water. For the way I spoke to you. For not believing you. For letting pride weigh more than kindness. The silence that followed wasn't empty. The river seemed to hush itself, and even the wind slowed, as if to let his apology sink into the world. Behind him, Marta's voice came gently. She would have forgiven you, sir. She already did. But it means something that you finally said it. He rose slowly, his knees stiff, his chest tight, but lighter somehow. It doesn't change what happened. No, Marta agreed. But it changes what happens next. Graham turned to her. What do I do with that? She smiled faintly. Start by showing up. The Harvest Festival is tomorrow, remember? Sophie's waiting. Maybe she doesn't know why you're really coming, but she'll feel it. He nodded slowly. The idea of it felt strange attending a small-town festival, surrounded by laughter and music and forgiveness he didn't think he deserved. Yet, something in him ached for that simplicity, that warmth. Marta closed her umbrella and looked up at the pale morning sky. The first rays of sun were breaking through the mist, painting soft gold over the trees. Look, she said. Seems the storm's finally over. Graham followed her gaze. The light fell across the bridge, gentle and pure, touching his face like a quiet blessing. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in a long while. Maybe it's time I stop living in the storm. They began walking toward town, side by side, the sound of their footsteps mixing with the faint rustle of drying leaves. In the distance, the church bell rang again, its echo soft and clear over the hills. Graham slipped his hand into his coat pocket, feeling the folded photograph still there, Laura's smile pressed against his palm, fragile but real. He didn't need to look at it to know it would stay with him. As they reached the end of the bridge, he glanced back one last time. The river below shimmered under the sunlight, as if washing away years of silence and guilt. For the first time in his life, he didn't turn away from it. He whispered to himself, tomorrow, I'll go. The breeze carried the words across the water like a promise. The morning of the harvest festival dawned crisp and bright. The sky stretched wide and clean, brushed with faint streaks of orange and gold. The town square of Woodstock was already stirring vendors, setting up wooden stalls, children laughing as they chased each other around the fountain, and the smell of cinnamon, cider, and baked apples weaving through the cool air. Graham parked his car a few streets away, unsure why his hands trembled slightly as he buttoned his coat. He had attended grand banquets in New York, gala dinners under crystal chandeliers. But this small-town celebration felt heavier somehow, more honest. He walked down the cobblestone street, past old brick storefronts decorated with dried corn stalks and pumpkins. Folk music drifted from the gazebo, soft and lively. People greeted one another by name, neighbors, friends, the kind of familiarity he had long forgotten. Near the center square, a small stand caught his attention. Sophie's homemade apple pies, for Grandma's table. The sign was painted in bright yellow, the letters uneven but full of joy. Behind the table stood Sophie, her braid bouncing as she arranged the boxes. Her grandmother, Mrs. Carter, sat beside her, her silver hair tucked under a wool hat, her face lined with years but lit with warmth. When Sophie spotted him, she waved so hard she nearly knocked over a pie. "Mr. Leland, you came!" He smiled, a little awkwardly, raising a hand. "I did promise, didn't I?" Mrs. Carter looked up at him, her eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. "You must be the kind gentleman who bought pies in the rain," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I suppose I am," he said, managing a small smile. "They were worth every penny," Sophie giggled. "Grandma says no one should overpay, but I told her you were special." Her words made him laugh quietly. "I'm not sure that's true," he replied. Mrs. Carter studied him for a moment longer, then nodded toward the photo Sophie had pinned to the corner of the table. It was the same faded image Laura had once taken in front of his house. The sight of it still tightened his chest, but this time the feeling wasn't shame, it was something closer to gratitude. "She loved that picture," Mrs. Carter said quietly. "Said it reminded her of the good days, before everything got too hard." Graham lowered his gaze. "She was a good woman," he said softly. "Better than most." The older woman's expression softened. "She forgave easy," she said. "Too easy, maybe. I used to tell her that not everyone deserves it, but she'd just smile and say, 'If you wait for people to deserve forgiveness, you'll never give it at all.'" The words struck him like a gentle bell inside his chest. He nodded, unable to speak. Sophie leaned across the table. "You should try the new batch. I helped bake them this time." He took a box carefully, opening it just enough to breathe in the scent, sweet apples, sugar, a hint of nutmeg. The smell carried him back to his mother's kitchen when he was a boy, when forgiveness came easily and pride was still a stranger. As he handed Mrs. Carter the money, he noticed a small jar beside the pies. A handwritten label read, "For the community garden." Coins and bills filled it halfway. "What's this?" he asked. "Town project," Mrs. Carter said. "They're rebuilding the garden behind the church. Laura used to help plant there when Sophie was little." He looked at the jar, then at Sophie's hopeful eyes, and without overthinking, pulled out his wallet and dropped in several folded bills. "Consider it an investment," he said. Sophie gasped. "That's so much." He smiled gently. "Good things deserve a little help." Mrs. Carter placed a wrinkled hand over his. "That's kind of you, mister?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Leland. Graham. Leland." For a moment, everything stilled. The music, the laughter, even the air. Mrs. Carter's hand froze. Her eyes, sharp now, flicked to the photograph, then back to him. The realization washed over her face slowly, like light filling a dark room. "Oh," she whispered. "You're him." For a long moment, no one spoke. The laughter and chatter around the square blurred into distant noise. Graham stood still, feeling the weight of the name settle over them both like a hush. Mrs. Carter's hand trembled slightly where it rested on the table. Sophie looked from one to the other, puzzled. "Grandma, what's wrong?" The older woman took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Graham's face. "Nothing, sweetheart," she said gently. "Just remembering. Then, after a pause, she turned to him. So, Mr. Leland, I suppose time brings us all back to the places we left unfinished. Graham nodded slowly. It does, he said, his voice low. I came here because your granddaughter reminded me of someone I wronged, someone I should have defended, not condemned. Mrs. Carter's lips pressed together. Laura, she said softly. He lowered his head. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I should ask, but I wanted you to hear me say it anyway. I was cruel when I should have been kind, and I've regretted it for years. The silence that followed was heavy, but not sharp, like a wound that had long since scarred over but still ached in the cold. Mrs. Carter studied him for a while. The anger she once carried flickered in her eyes, but so did exhaustion, and something gentler underneath. You can't undo the years, she said finally. You can't bring her back. I know, his voice broke. But I can try to honor what she gave this town, what she gave me, even if I didn't see it until now. Sophie tugged at her grandmother's sleeve. Grandma, Mom always said people can change, remember? Like the apple trees after a bad winter. Mrs. Carter's expression softened. She reached out, brushing Sophie's hair. Your mama did say that, she murmured. Then she looked at Graham again, and her voice lost its edge. If you truly mean to honor her, then help someone else the way you should have helped her. That's all the forgiveness I have left to give. Graham swallowed hard, his throat tight. I will, he said. You have my word. For the first time, Mrs. Carter smiled, not wide, but real. She picked up one of the warm pies and held it out to him. Then take this, Laura's recipe. We don't sell this one. We keep it for family. The gesture made his eyes sting. He accepted it carefully, holding the box as if it were made of glass. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me, she said. Thank the little girl who believes you're worth forgiving. Sophie grinned, proud of herself. Told you he was special. The tension broke with quiet laughter. Around them, the festival carried on, children's voices rising, the fiddle's melody dancing through the air, and the scent of fresh hay and cider swirling in the breeze. A volunteer called out for the start of the pie-tasting contest. Sophie hurried off to join her friends, her red scarf fluttering like a ribbon of joy. Mrs. Carter turned back to Graham. She misses her mama every day, she said. But somehow, she still finds reasons to smile. You'd do well to learn from her. I'm trying, he said softly. One day at a time. The church bell rang noon, its sound warm and steady. He looked up at the clear sky, the same bridge of blue Laura once admired, the same sun that now touched the festival tents in gentle gold. For the first time, he felt something break open in his chest, not pain, not regret, but release. He looked at Mrs. Carter again. May I come by tomorrow to see the garden project? She hesitated, then nodded. If you're coming to work, not just to remember, I'll bring my hands, he said with a faint smile, and a shovel. She chuckled softly. Then I'll bring the coffee. As he turned to leave, the sound of laughter and music followed him down the path. Sophie's voice rose above the noise, bright, full of life. He glanced back once and saw her twirling beneath a banner that read, Harvest of Hope. He smiled, holding the pie close to his chest. The words on the banner blurred slightly in his vision, but their meaning stayed clear. Some harvests, he thought, don't grow from soil. They grow from forgiveness. The next morning dawned soft and cool, with a faint scent of damp earth lingering in the air. A thin layer of fog clung to the hills as Graham drove toward the old church at the edge of town. The road was lined with sugar maples, their leaves turning from gold to rust, a quiet applause of color that followed him all the way. He parked beside the gravel path where a small group of volunteers was already gathering. There were wooden crates filled with soil, trowels, and gloves laid neatly on a table, and rows of empty planters waiting for hands to fill them. Laughter drifted in the air light, easy and unguarded. Marta was there, of course, wearing a plaid scarf and a knowing smile. She waved when she saw him. Didn't think you'd actually show up, she teased gently. I said I would, he replied, stepping out of the car. And I brought coffee. Her eyes brightened. Then you're already forgiven for being late. He chuckled softly and handed her the thermos. I was trying to remember the last time I held a shovel. It's been decades. You'll remember, she said, pouring coffee into paper cups. The earth has a way of teaching patience. Sophie came running up the hill then, her red scarf flying behind her. "Mr. Leland, you came!" she cried, her voice bubbling with excitement. He smiled. "Seems I did. You're the boss today, right?" "Grandma says I can supervise," she said proudly, holding up a clipboard with uneven writing. "Garden team captain. We're planting marigolds and apple saplings. Marigolds for Mom, because she liked yellow best." His throat tightened at that, but he managed a soft nod. "That's a good choice." Sophie grinned. "You can help me dig holes." She handed him a small trowel, and for the first time in years, Graham knelt in the dirt. The soil was cold but rich, dark with promise. His polished shoes sank slightly into the mud, but he didn't care. As he worked beside Sophie, he noticed the way the sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the rows of planters. It was slow work, the kind that asked for stillness more than strength. He dug, planted, pressed, watered. With every seed, he felt something inside him loosen, not quite forgiveness, but the first hint of peace. Marta watched from a distance, sipping her coffee, her face calm and content. She saw it happening, the unspoken healing that didn't need ceremony or applause. Just earth, breath, and quiet effort. After a while, Sophie sat back on her heels and wiped her brow with the back of her hand. "You're really good at this," she said. He smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." Who?" He looked at her. "Someone who taught me how to start over." Sophie tilted her head, thinking. "You mean Grandma?" He laughed softly. "Something like that." A bell rang from the church tower, echoing through the valley. The volunteers paused to listen a moment of stillness wrapped in birdsong and morning light. Graham glanced toward the church garden, where an empty wooden bench sat beneath an old oak tree. "What's that for?" he asked. Marta joined him, her voice low. "We're dedicating it today, in memory of those we lost and those we found again." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words settle into him. "Then maybe I'll stay for the dedication." "Good," she said softly. "Laura would like that." He turned to her. "And you?" Marta smiled gently. "I like seeing you here. It feels right." The sun climbed higher, warming the mist into light. Sophie laughed as she ran to fetch another sapling, her boots splashing in puddles. Graham watched her, his hands resting on the handle of the shovel, and for the first time, the air around him didn't feel heavy. He was still learning, still trying, but the world was quietly giving him a second chance. By noon, the garden had begun to take shape. Neat rows of marigolds glowed like drops of sunlight against the dark soil, and the new apple saplings stood straight, their tender leaves trembling in the light breeze. The church bells rang again, calling the volunteers to gather near the oak tree. A small wooden plaque leaned against the bench Marta had mentioned earlier. It was simple, carved by hand, in memory of those who planted kindness. The pastor, a gentleman with a gray beard and a voice like warm honey, thanked everyone for coming. Then he invited anyone who wished to speak. Marta stepped forward first, saying a few quiet words about community, about how the garden was more than soil. It was a promise that life could grow again, even after loss. Sophie followed, holding a marigold in her small hands. "This one's for my mom," she said shyly, "because she said flowers don't stop blooming just because it rains." People smiled softly, some wiping tears. Graham felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, but for a moment, the words wouldn't come. Then, almost without thinking, he took a step forward. His voice was low, uncertain at first. "I don't know if I belong up here," he began, "but I once knew someone who worked harder and loved better than I ever did. Her name was Laura Carter. I wronged her, years ago. I forgot that dignity doesn't come from wealth, but from kindness, and I've spent a long time trying to forget what I did. But someone," he glanced at Sophie, who smiled up at him, "reminded me that the right thing to do isn't to forget, but to plant something better in its place." A hush fell over the garden. Even the birds seemed to quiet. He bent down, took a small seedling from a basket nearby, and pressed it gently into the earth near Sophie's marigold. "For Laura," he said softly. When he stood, Marta was crying quietly, her hand pressed to her mouth. The pastor nodded solemnly. "Amen," he said. "Forgiveness takes root in hearts that are ready to grow again." After the ceremony, people lingered, sharing cider, trading stories, laughing softly. Graham sat on the bench beneath the oak, watching Sophie chase butterflies between the rows of flowers. The air was filled with that sweet, humble fragrance of wet soil and apples. Marta joined him, handing him a paper cup of cider. "You did good today," she said. He smiled faintly. "I just put my hands in the dirt. Sometimes," she said. "That's where healing starts." He nodded, gazing out at the garden. The sunlight caught the plaque, making the carved letters shine. For the first time in years, the silence inside him wasn't empty. It was peaceful, like a field after the storm. Sophie came running back, her cheeks flushed pink. "Mr. Leland, Grandma says the apples we planted will be ready in a few years. You have to come back and taste them." He chuckled softly. "Then I guess I'll have to stick around that long. Promise?" He met her bright eyes and nodded. "Promise." She grinned, wrapping her arms around his waist before darting off again. He stood there for a long moment, the echo of her laughter blending with the rustle of the leaves. The afternoon light shifted, warm and golden, falling across his shoulders. He looked down at his hands still stained with soil and smiled. For the first time in a long time, he didn't want to wash them clean. The road back to Leland Manor felt shorter this time. The air was crisp, the sky washed in the soft blue of early evening. The mansion stood quiet against the hillside, no longer a fortress of pride, but a house of echoes. The lights from town shimmered faintly in the distance, like stars that had fallen closer to earth. Graham parked by the front gate and sat for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel. The silence inside the car was thick but not heavy. It was the kind of quiet that waited for courage. He stepped out, gravel crunching beneath his shoes, and unlocked the gate that had once kept everyone else out. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Dust drifted in the light from the tall windows. The clock in the foyer still ticked slow, deliberate, unchanged. Everything else, though, seemed smaller. He walked through the hallway, passing the portraits, the vases, the polished marble floor that once reflected only loneliness. His footsteps echoed softly. When he reached the stairs, he hesitated, staring up toward the attic door at the end of the second-floor landing. He hadn't been up there in years, not since before Europe, before the silence, before the night everything fell apart. Something in him stirred, a quiet pull toward unfinished business. The attic was cool and dim. Sunlight filtered through a narrow window, painting the floorboards in soft lines of gold. Old trunks and furniture were covered with white sheets that fluttered faintly in the breeze from the cracked window. He stood there for a moment, listening to the creaks of the old wood and the faint hum of the world outside. Then, in the corner, he noticed a small chest familiar, carved with initials LC. He knelt beside it. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a folded apron and a stack of yellowed recipe cards, lay an envelope. The paper was thin, the ink faded, but still legible. On the front, in neat handwriting, were the words, "For Mr. Leland, if he ever remembers." His breath caught. For a moment, he just stared at it, afraid to touch it, afraid of what it might say. Or worse, what it might forgive. Finally, he slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was delicate, looping gently across the page. "Sir, I don't know if you will ever read this, but I wanted to write it anyway. I never took your watch. I suppose, deep down, you know that by now. I wanted you to understand that I was not angry when I left. I was sad not for losing the job, but for losing the chance to keep believing that kindness existed in your house. Still, I choose to believe it's there, somewhere, waiting to be found again. People make mistakes. Pride makes them forget who they are. I've had my share too. But forgiveness is lighter to carry than bitterness, and I don't want to leave this world holding anything heavy. If someday you find this letter, it will mean you remembered. And that, Mr. Leland, will be enough." He lowered the paper slowly, the words trembling in his hands. The air in the attic felt alive, as if the walls themselves had been waiting for him to finally read those lines. A tear slipped down his cheek before he even realized it. It fell onto the letter, smudging the ink slightly. He smiled through it, whispering, "You always were kinder than I deserved." He folded the letter carefully, holding it against his chest. For a long time, he just sat there, surrounded by dust and light. the house creaking softly around him. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like someone was there, not haunting him, but forgiving him. Downstairs, the clock chimed once, twice, then fell silent. Outside, the last light of day stretched across the windows, turning everything to amber. Graham closed his eyes. In that stillness, he could almost hear her voice, faint, calm, and full of mercy. He sat there for a long time, the letter resting in his hands like a living thing. Every line carried her voice, calm, forgiving, unshakably kind. Outside, the wind whispered through the maple trees, brushing the house with the sound of soft remembrance. Graham rose slowly, his knees stiff, and looked around the attic. The same space that once stored forgotten furniture and memories now felt sacred, as if forgiveness had its own weight, lighter than air but strong enough to keep him standing. He walked toward the small window overlooking the town. From there, he could see the steeple of the church where he had planted the sapling, the patch of earth that now held Laura's marigold. In the distance, he could almost see Sophie's red scarf fluttering like a flame against the autumn sky. The house creaked again, gentle and familiar. He smiled faintly. "You were right, Laura," he whispered. "Kindness was here all along. I just forgot how to open the door." He went downstairs, each step slow, deliberate. The smell of cedar followed him, mixing with the faint scent of rain still clinging to the air. In the parlor, light poured through the windows, turning the dust motes into tiny stars. Everything looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. He walked to the old piano. Its keys were yellowed, its lid slightly warped from years of silence. He brushed a hand over it, then pressed one note. The sound was soft, uncertain, but alive. It chuckled quietly. "Still out of tune," he said, half to himself. Then, almost without thinking, he sat down and began to play, not a song he remembered, but one his hands seemed to find on their own. The melody was simple, trembling like a prayer. As the notes filled the room, he could feel the house breathing again. When the last chord faded, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was warm. Graham stood and walked to the desk by the window. He took a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer, smoothed it flat, and began to write. His handwriting was slower now, steadier. "Dear Sophie and Marta, this house has held too much pride, too much silence. I want to change that. I'd like to open it not as a mansion, but as a place for those who need rest, work, or warmth. The garden we started at the church, let's grow one here too. Let's make this place worthy of the forgiveness it's been given." He paused, looking out the window again, where the last light of evening brushed across the hills. "I was once a man who thought he could buy peace. Now I know peace must be earned with hands in the dirt and with hearts that stay open." He signed his name, folded the letter, and placed it in an envelope. On the front, he wrote, "For Sophie and Marta to be opened together." Then he took out his phone, hesitated for a moment, and smiled. When Marta answered, her voice carried its usual calm warmth. "Mr. Leland, is everything all right?" "Yes," he said softly. "For the first time in a long while, it is. I need you and Sophie to come by tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." A pause. Then Marta's voice brightened. "The garden?" He smiled. "Bigger than that. The house." He ended the call and stood by the window once more. Outside, twilight deepened a slow, gentle surrender. The town lights began to glow, one by one, like candles in the dark. He held Laura's letter in one hand and his own in the other. The two pieces of paper fluttered slightly in the breeze from the open window, their words whispering across decades, one from the past, one from the present, both born from forgiveness. Graham looked around the quiet house, and for the first time, it didn't feel like it was waiting for something. It felt alive. He whispered into the stillness, "Tomorrow they'll come home." Morning came with the kind of golden light that made everything look softer. The hills, the leaves, even the old mansion perched above the town. For the first time in years, the windows of Leland Manor were open. Curtains swayed gently in the breeze, carrying the smell of apples and pine through the hallways. Graham stood in the foyer, adjusting his old jacket. The letter he'd written for Marta and Sophie sat on the entry table beside a vase of fresh marigolds. He'd placed Laura's photograph there too, framed in simple oak. The smile in that picture no longer haunted him, it guided him. The sound of an approaching car drifted up the gravel drive. He stepped outside. The sunlight was soft on his face. warm but not harsh. When the car stopped, Sophie was the first to jump out, her red scarf fluttering behind her. Marta followed, smiling uncertainly. "Mr. Leland," Sophie shouted, running toward him. "You really fixed it up." He laughed, the sound unguarded and light. "Just a little sweeping. Turns out dust doesn't argue much." She giggled, then paused as her eyes caught the open doorway. The air inside shimmered with sunlight. "It doesn't look scary anymore," she said. "It looks happy." "That's the idea," he said gently. Marta joined them at the steps. Her eyes moved slowly over the house, the porch, the flower boxes lining the windowsills. "You've been busy," she murmured. He nodded. "It felt strange at first, this place so full of ghosts. But I realized they weren't here to punish me. They were waiting to be welcomed home." She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled softly. "You sound like someone who's finally forgiven himself." "Not quite," he said. "But I'm learning." He led them inside. The parlor, once dark and heavy, was now bright with morning light. The old piano gleamed near the window, freshly dusted. On top of it sat a pie dish apple, of course with a note that read, "Made by Sophie." Marta's hand went to her heart. "You've turned this place into something beautiful." Graham shook his head. "No, you all did. I just opened the door." Sophie wandered around the room, her small fingers brushing the piano keys, the edge of the mantel, the marigolds on the table. She stopped near the window where a soft breeze carried in the smell of autumn leaves. "It feels like Mom's here," she said simply. Marta's eyes filled and Graham's throat tightened. "She is," he said, "in every good thing that grows here." They spent the morning walking through the garden behind the house. The soil was freshly turned, the sunlight slipping through the branches in long golden stripes. Graham knelt to plant the last marigold beside Sophie. "See that," he said. "If you plant them facing east, they always follow the Sunday." Sophie grinned. "Like people who don't give up." He smiled. "Exactly like that." When they finished, they sat together on the stone steps at the back porch. Marta handed him a cup of coffee she'd brought, steaming gently in the cool air. "Feels like the house is breathing again," she said. He nodded, gazing out at the field. "Maybe it's because it finally forgave me. Or maybe," she said with a small smile, "it was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." The wind rustled through the trees, scattering golden leaves around them like blessings. Sophie laughed and held her hands out, trying to catch them. "It's like confetti," she cried. Graham leaned back, letting the warmth of the morning soak into him. For years, he had feared coming home. But now, watching Sophie's joy, feeling Marta's quiet peace, he realized that home wasn't a place he'd lost. It was a light he had carried all along, dimmed but never gone. And today, that light had finally found its way back. The afternoon drifted toward evening, the sunlight softening to amber as it touched the windows of Leland Manor. The old house glowed like a lantern on the hill, its windows alive with warmth instead of silence. Inside, the scent of apple pie filled the air. Marta hummed quietly in the kitchen while Sophie set the table with small, deliberate care mismatched plates, a jar of marigolds at the center, 2 candles flickering beside them. Graham stood by the fireplace, watching the light dance across the walls. He smiled. "You've both turned this place into a home again." Marta chuckled. All it needed was a little warmth and a few hands that cared. Sophie looked up, her blue eyes bright. "And pie." He laughed, a full, unguarded laugh that echoed softly through the room. "And pie," he agreed. When dinner was done, they moved to the parlor. Sophie curled up on the rug with a blanket while Marta played a gentle tune on the piano, slow, familiar, the same hymn that used to fill Sunday mornings. Graham sat nearby, gazing at the flickering fire. He spoke quietly, his voice steady but tender. "You know, when I was your age, Sophie, I thought being strong meant never saying sorry. But the truth is, the strongest thing I've ever done was admit I was wrong." Sophie tilted her head. "Even grown-ups make mistakes. Especially grown-ups," he said with a smile. "But when we fix them, when we choose to love again, we become who we were supposed to be all along." She nodded, thinking hard. "Then you're fixed now?" He looked toward Marta, who smiled softly from the piano. "Not fixed," he said. "Just finally at peace." The fire crackled, filling the pause between words. Outside, the last of the sunlight spilled across the garden, touching the marigolds they had planted that morning. The petals shimmered like little flames, bright even as the day faded. Marta rose and lit the lamps around the room one by one. Their glow mingled with the firelight, wrapping everything in soft gold. "There," she said. No shadows left. Graham looked around, feeling the truth of it. The house no longer carried the weight of loss it breathed, alive with laughter, music, and the simple grace of second chances. He turned to Sophie. "Before you go, I want to show you something." He led her to the front door. Night had just begun to fall, and the hills shimmered under the first touch of starlight. Down the slope, the town glowed gently: windows, streetlights, the steeple of the church. Sophie's hand slipped into his. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yes," he said softly. "It always was. I just forgot how to see it." They stood there in silence for a moment, 3 silhouettes framed in golden light, the house behind them warm and alive. Then Sophie turned to him. "Mr. Leland? Yes, sweetheart?" She smiled. "Mom would be happy you remembered." The words caught in his throat. He knelt, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I think she'd be proud of you too," he said. "You brought me back." "Though?" The wind stirred the marigolds by the door, scattering a few petals across the steps. They glowed faintly under the lamplight, like sparks that refused to fade. Marta closed the door gently behind them, leaving the house bathed in soft golden light. The clock in the hall chimed once, echoing calm and steady. Upstairs, in the attic window, the framed photograph of Laura caught the reflection of the firelight. For a moment, it almost seemed as though she was smiling not from the past, but from right there in the present. Outside, the night deepened. The wind carried the scent of apple and cedar through the trees, and from the old house on the hill, light spilled gently into the dark, the kind of light that meant someone, finally, had come home. Sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. Graham Leland's old house once stood silent and cold, but now it glows again, not because of wealth or grandeur, but because laughter and kindness have come back through its doors. A man who once believed he could buy peace, found, at last, that peace is built by hand, one act of forgiveness, one shared meal, one small seed planted in good soil. As the light of the Vermont sunset poured through the windows, Graham finally understood. Family isn't just blood, it's every heart that chooses to stay, every person who helps another find their way home. Marta's patience, Sophie's innocence, and Laura's quiet mercy stitched together what pride had torn apart. And in that gentle stillness, the house became what it was always meant to be, a place where love remembers and where forgiveness lives. The lesson is simple. Love and redemption are never out of reach. True wealth isn't counted in dollars or marble floors, but in the people who still choose to sit with you when the lights go dim. A single act of kindness, like an old lamp glowing softly by a window, can guide us through even the darkest roads of our lives. Maybe you felt that too, in a shared cup of coffee on a cold morning, a letter you never expected, or a hand that forgave you when you couldn't forgive yourself. Life has a way of offering second chances to those who still believe in goodness. All we have to do is open the door. So tonight, take a quiet moment to think about who's waiting for your call, your visit, your apology, or your forgiveness. If this story touched your heart, type 1" the comments. If you think it could be told better, type 0 and tell us what you felt. And if this story warmed your soul even a little, consider sharing it, because somewhere out there, someone might just be waiting to hear that it's never too late to come home.